Welcome to 21st Century Radio. I'm Dr. Zohara Hieronimus. Laura Kortner is our executive producer, and Anita Brockington, our engineer. Our guest both hours of our program today is Harvey Wasserman. Harvey is a well-known American journalist, author, democracy activist, and advocate for renewable energy. He has been a strategist and organizer in the anti-nuclear movement in the United States for over 30 years and has been a featured speaker on Today, Nightline, National Public Radio, CNN, Lou Dobbs Tonight, and many other major media outlets. Wasserman is as well senior advisor to Greenpeace USA and the Nuclear Information and Resource Service. He's also an investigative reporter and a senior editor of the Columbus Free Press, where his coverage back in the 2004 election with Bob I think I've pronounced this right, Fritakis prompted Reverend Jesse Jackson to call them together the Woodward and Bernstein of the 2004 election. Wasserman helped pioneer the global grassroots movement against atomic reactors, and he coined the phrase in 1974, no nukes. I first met Harvey Wasserman in the mid-1980s when I interviewed him about his groundbreaking 1980 book co-authored with Norman Solomon entitled Killing Our Own, The Disaster of America's Experience with Atomic Irradiation. Among other topics, we'll discuss how the industry has changed, the harm that has come from it globally, and where things stand today. Harvey's newest book, The People's Spiral of U.S. History, From Jigonsaseh to Solartopia, shows us that the people's spiral of U.S. history will show us that these shortening cycles from 1688 to 1992 is a lesson in overall polarization between native patriarchies and puritanical persistence, I think one should say, and oppression. There is a solution, as Wasserman maintains, and it's called Solartopia, and we'll devote our second hour this evening to that coverage. Here to guide us through the maze of nuclear versus solar, corporate oligarchies versus just and sustainable societal systems, and the current reality of voter suppression is our guest, Harvey Sluggo Wasserman. Thank you so much for joining us, Harvey.
Well, I have to call myself Sluggo after all this Harvey Weinstein stuff. I'm in L.A. If I introduce myself as Harvey Wasserman, I can get punched out, so I got to be careful.
Well, I like the picture I saw of you with the baseball bat from your batting days. Yeah. That was adorable.
Yes, well, I was a great athlete, and I find that the older I get, the better I was. So,
I relate to that entirely. I was also a great athlete. It's interesting how many really great athletes became investigative reporters. I think it was sort of like our tenacity to drive to goal.
No, you know what it is? It's winning. If I grew up in Central Ohio, I was captain of my high school tennis team, and I it was all about winning in Central Ohio State football, all that stuff. And how I got hooked on activism is when I was a junior in high school, there was a roller rink downtown that was segregated. And so this is in Columbus, Ohio in 1962, for God's sake, 8 years after Brown versus Board of Education. But it was segregated, and I was 16, and we had a demonstration. There were three of us, and we won. And I said, wow, that's fantastic. And so ever since then, knowing that you can in fact change the world, that's why I'm so hooked on activism.
That's fascinating. I started when I handed out flyers when I was 14 for a talk on acid rain given by Ralph Nader. And I don't know, there's just something about trying to make a difference in the world and believing you can, even when there have been so many setbacks. But, your book, Killing Our Own, The Disaster of America's Experience with Atomic Radiation, was really a wake-up call for me into a whole spectrum of reality I hadn't spent much time in. And I thought we'd start there with that issue, then maybe move to voter suppression, and save our second hour for your new wonderful book, The People's Spiral of U.S. History. So, talking about the nuclear issue. I mean, you and I we talked about Chernobyl in the past. We didn't hang out together during the Fukushima, but give our audience, if you would, your perspective, having been at this for so many decades.
Well, I have been involved with the nuclear power. Since we've gone way, way back, I'll tell you that in 1959, when I was 13 for my bar mitzvah, I got a book called Our Friend the Atom by Walt Disney. And I used it as the basis of a report that I did in ninth grade. So I actually knew how nuclear reactors operated when I was 13,
Wow.
weirdly enough. I never thought much about it. And if you'd have asked me between 1959 and 1973, I would have told you I supported nuclear power. But in 1973, I was living on a communal farm in western Massachusetts, 90 miles west of Boston. And we were farming organically, and we were doing all those wonderful things that hippies did on organic farms, and all the stories you've heard are 100% true. And we woke up one morning to read the newspaper. On the front page of the local paper was a picture where they wanted to build a nuclear plant 4 miles from our house. And we didn't even have a meeting. It's amazing. We did not sit around a table and very seriously discuss the pros and cons of nuclear power. We just said, no, we're going to stop this. We coined the phrase no nukes, and we organized, and those nukes were never built. The town of Montague, Massachusetts, there's now a nature conservancy where there would have been 2 nuclear reactors. And so I've been doing this ever since. And everything that we initially feared about nuclear power has turned out to be worse. Radiation, we were told at the time, for example, that a nuclear power plant could not explode. And we were told this repeatedly, to the extent that if any of us went out and gave a speech in public and warned that a nuclear power reactor, a commercial one, could explode, somebody would invariably jump up and say, I'm a nuclear engineer, and it's physically impossible for a nuclear power plant to explode. And then in 1986, Chernobyl exploded, for God's sakes. And I want to say, by the way, anyone listening in, you should see, if you haven't already, you should see the HBO series on Chernobyl. Have you seen it?
No, I haven't.
Oh, my God. Well, see it early in the day, and don't see it alone. I mean, it's the most terrifying thing I've ever seen on television. They did a spectacular job. It's 99.9% accurate. They did take some liberties with some of the characters, but it is absolutely devastating. So when Chernobyl exploded, and basically we believe it killed about 1 million people, the industry here jumped up and said, no, that's a Soviet reactor. An American reactor can't explode. So then in 2011, the 4 reactors of Fukushima that did blow up, basically from hydrogen explosions, although Unit 3 looks an awful lot like a mushroom cloud, those are American reactors. Those are all General Electric nuclear power plants. And they did explode. And there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And so that part of the worst of our fears about nuclear power has been confirmed. Now, back then, when people asked us, well, if you don't have nuclear power, what are you going to do? And we said, well, we'll go wind and solar. We really had no idea what we were talking about, but it sounded good. And, the industries were just kind of starting. And I have to say that it is one of the great miracles of modern human civilization. I'm not like overstating the case here, is that the technologies of renewable energy have exceeded all expectations. Nobody in the early 70s could ever have imagined how powerful and economic and efficient wind and solar and batteries and LED efficiency have turned out to be. They are all trillion-dollar industries, and they are all way, way ahead of schedule and under budget, to the extent that we can now very credibly predict that the United States could get all of its electricity from renewables within a short enough period of time to at least slow and possibly reverse the CO2 emissions that are causing global warming.
So let's talk about sort of the elephant in the room, which is, so what's in its way? I mean, when Trump put on that 30% tariff on solar panels coming from China, that was not helpful, along with a lot of other things the Trump administration has done. But so why is it that as a person just sort of in the general public, you'd never know how far along we are?
Well, The tariff he put on solar panels did cause a downturn. It may actually have the desired effect of spurring more panels to be built in the United States. But I have to say, I follow this pretty closely, and every week there's another breakthrough in solar technology. I just saw one in Wired, some coating that they can put on solar cells that will divide up the photons and expand the energy harvest. My son-in-law and daughter have solar panels on their house here. I'm in Los Angeles. I'm about to put them on mine.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem with shopping for solar panels is that every week the price goes down, and you're saying to yourself, well, gee, if I wait another week, they'll go down again. And every week they get more efficient, but at some point you got to jump in.
Right.
So the bottom line here is that we have way more, and I mean tens of thousands of jobs, tens of thousands of people more working in the renewable energy industry than we do in fossil fuels and nuclear power. I mean, if you add up the number of people in the United States working on solar, on wind, on efficiency, and on batteries, it dwarfs nuclear power. About 100,000 in nuclear power, about 60,000 in coal, although that's dropping rapidly. Same with oil. The only place in fossil nuclear where you have a lot of jobs is in gas, and that's fracking, and that's destroying the earth. I mean, if you had to design a technology to destroy the ability of human beings to live on Earth, it would be fracking.
Yeah.
I mean, it's unbelievable how bad it is.
Well, and Maryland's one of the states that has banned it, thankfully, due to people like yourself, our own breed of activism and activists who worked at this like 8 and 9 years.
Well, yes. I've seen Josh Fox's movie, and I've heard him speak, and fracking is almost as terrifying as nuclear power. I mean, and thankfully Maryland, as you say, has banned it, but where it really needs to be banned is in Pennsylvania and Ohio.
Right.
I mean, those two states are committing total ecological suicide on behalf of the entire human race.
Why don't you summarize for us your perspective on fracking? I've done numerous shows, but it's always good to get another approach to what you say.
Well, what they do is they pump, all sorts of suicidal chemicals straight into the earth. They destroy the water table. I mean, where do they think we're going to get water in the future? Fracking is an absolute injection. It's like injecting cyanide into your own bloodstream. It's just horrendous, and you cannot drink the water in a fracked area. And in addition to that, they are wrecking the tectonic plates and causing more earthquakes, including near places where there are nuclear power plants. I mean, talk about a double whammy.
Yeah.
Fracking near a nuclear plant is like begging for another Fukushima or Chernobyl. It's insane. And those two things alone, the earthquakes and the destruction of the water, are enough. But in addition to that, there's a tremendous radioactive burden that comes with fracking, because the stuff underground is radioactive, and when you bring that stuff up, it is just like coal. Coal has radon in it. When you burn coal, you spew radiation into the atmosphere, and when you bring up the gas from the fracked tectonic plates, you are pouring radiation into the atmosphere. It's insane. It has to stop immediately.
Yeah, agreed there. Look, we have to take a break. When we come back, we'll flip back a little bit to where nuclear is and why there might not be any more nuclear power plants. Of course, there's always this issue of the race to nuclear war and warheads. We'll return shortly. Our guest is Harvey Wasserman. Learn all about his extraordinary work over so many decades. Go to www.solartopia.com. That's SOLARtopia.com. And don't forget, next hour we'll talk about the people's spiral of U.S. history.
I'm Joseph Mangano. I'm Executive Director of the Radiation and Public Health Project. Our studies of the health hazards of nuclear reactors have found nuclear plants that close, we see an immediate drop locally in infant deaths and child cancers, and over a long period in total cancers. If you want to find out more about us and how you can help, please go to www.radiation.org. You're listening to 21st Century Radio with Dr. Hieronimus.
Welcome back to 21st Century Radio. Indeed, go to www.radiation.org. Harvey Wasserman is our guest, and he is really sort of a grandfatherly figure in the no-nuke work, and somebody I've always counted on for the best advice. And as Harvey says today, there won't be any more nuclear plants. Harvey, why do you say that?
They're too expensive. They take too long to build. No one with any brains is ever going to invest in a new nuclear power plant. Trump might. And Trump might use federal money, but that's the only place they're going to get it. There's 2 nuclear reactors left in the United States, and only 2, which are under construction. They're in Georgia at the Vogtle site, and they are coming in at close to $30 billion,
wow.
$15 billion for each reactor. And if those reactors opened today, they would be so far over market that they would just be knocked right off the grid. I mean, the nuclear power, even after it's amortized and paid for, cannot compete with wind and solar. I mean, let alone batteries and efficiency. So the technology is right out there with the buggy whip and the Edsel.
And how does it stand around the world? I mean, are other nations saying that's it for us?
Some are, but a few are holding on. Everybody's looking at China. China has developed solar. They tried to corner the world market in solar, but thankfully failed. But on the other hand, they're continuing with some nuclear, and we're hoping that they'll give up on that. There's a couple other countries that are building them basically because they want nuclear weapons.
Right.
If you build a nuclear power plant, you can get the material for nuclear weapons, and that's what Saudi Arabia and some other countries are really about here. And you got to put this in perspective. In the 1970s, the nuclear industry through France tried to give the Shah of Iran 36 atomic reactors. And if the Shah of Iran had built 36 atomic reactors, and then the Iranian Revolution would have happened, you would be looking at an Iran right now that has more nuclear weapons than they would know what to do with. And that's the huge danger we face with other countries building nuclear plants.
Exactly. And I read in one of your notes that not only that, the existing plants are losing huge amounts of money. You pointed out that they're being bailed out in New York, Connecticut, Ohio, Illinois, New Jersey. So the taxpayers really paying a hefty price for this corporate investment.
It's terrible. I love how all these corporate guys, they're all screaming at Bernie for talking about socialism. But whenever the big capitalists face an actual free market, they immediately turn to socialism for themselves.
Exactly.
I mean, Ohio if you get me going on this, I'll go for the next 2 hours. But Ohio legislature just voted $1 billion bailout for 2 reactors on Lake Erie that are just terrifying. They're old, they're decrepit, they're falling apart. They cannot in any way, shape, or form compete with renewable energy. And yet the government, is taking our money and our taxpayer and ratepayer money to bail them out. $7 billion in New York, more than almost $3 billion in Illinois. I mean, it's obscene what they're doing. And I got to tell you, Zoe, the most dangerous thing we face is the ongoing operation of these old nuclear power plants. There are 96 reactors in the United States. Only 2 of them are less than 30 years old. I mean, I don't know how many people are driving 30-year-old automobiles, but to operate a nuclear power plant that's more than 30 years old is just, it's like driving off a cliff. It's completely irresponsible. We have 2 reactors here in California that are surrounded by earthquake faults. And this isn't abstract. A dozen earthquake faults have been identified within a couple miles of the Diablo Canyon reactors in California, and they're continuing to operate them. I mean, what about Fukushima do you not understand?
And whatever happened to the Hanford plant? Wasn't that in Washington?
Yes, the Hanford Nuclear Reservation was a major nuclear weapons facility. It's just completely saturated with radioactive waste. I mean, it's just insane. And it's costing billions and billions and billions of dollars to try and clean it up. They're never going to get cleaned up. The only thing we're hoping is that they'll prevent radioactive water from getting into the Columbia River. That's what we're all praying, and the odds aren't good.
No,
but,
and when you look at the
one commercial reactor there, the Columbia Generating Station, still operating. It's completely decrepit, deteriorated, terrifyingly dangerous, and yet they continue to operate it.
It is unbelievable. I mean, I was reading what you wrote about, the Chernobyl reactor in '86 and the radioactive fallout, that it carpeted Ukraine, Belarus, much of Western Europe. It gutted the USSR, already in decline at the time. And you said there's 5,000 some studies with the human death toll already at 1 million or so, into the hundreds of billions fiscally. And when the Fukushima reactors in Japan broke open, what shocked me so much was how little actual coverage continued about the waste in the Pacific Ocean, and then the quarantining of all the fish, to the point that I think Korea stopped buying any from Japan, and there were all these moratoriums.
It's horrifying, and it's species extinction we're talking here. I mean, since March 11th, 2011, Fukushima has been pouring radiation into the Pacific Ocean. And we don't know how much, and we don't know. This is like an experiment on the Pacific Ocean to see if the radiation from Fukushima is going to kill it. Now, people say, oh, it's a small amount and blah, 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 but we don't know how much radiation it takes to completely poison an ocean. And we don't want to find out, but I'm afraid we're going to. And now they have all this radioactive water, liquid, on the site, and they've been containing it, but they just want to dump it in the ocean. It's astounding.
It is.
And I'll tell you on the aside, there's a little, there's been a big debate in the nuclear community, or the anti-nuclear community, about whether the Olympics should proceed. Because, radiation from a nuclear accident does not just kind of uniformly spread itself over the land. It comes down in clumps. We saw that at 3 Mile Island. We certainly saw it at Chernobyl. And at Fukushima, the radiation, more radiation went into the atmosphere than did at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And it's still going. And so it comes down in clumps. So there's been a movement among nuclear opponents to cancel the Tokyo Olympics because who knows where the radiation is. And now here along comes the coronavirus, and they may actually have to cancel it anyway.
Mm-hmm. That's a whole nother topic. Look, what I'd like to do, and we could spend a couple hours on that one as well, like how many people die annually of the flu versus the coronavirus. They're not even in the same ballpark. The flu wins. But I want to come to voter suppression while we have an opportunity to switch gears a bit, because with the elections upon us for 2020, so many idiosyncratic kind of phenomena already with the machines, with the reporting. I mean, it's pretty unreal, almost surreal. Talk to us about voter suppression. I mean, this is one of your expertise.
Well, unfortunately, so I was living in Columbus, Ohio in 2004, and saw up close and personal the theft of a presidential election. I mean, John Kerry was the rightful winner in 2004. Karl Rove came to town. George Bush's, Svengali there, and got the Secretary of State of Ohio to swing the election through stripping the voter rolls, more than 300,000 people in a state with 5 million voters, and flipping the electronic vote count when they had to. And so from 12:20 at night, John Kerry was leading by 4.2%, and then suddenly the flow of the vote count mysteriously stopped, and at 2 a.m., George Bush eventually won the election by 118,000 votes. So there was a flip of 300,000 votes and a strip of about 300,000 voters. And this is basically the modus operandi for the Republican Party. Not that the Democrats wouldn't do it if they were smart enough, but they're apparently not, since 2000. And the Democrats have legitimately won every presidential election since 2000. Gore was the rightful winner in 2000. Kerry was the rightful winner in 2004. And then you had Obama in 2008 and 12. And then Clinton was the rightful winner in 2016. Now, the basic operation is simple and twofold. First of all, you've got computerized voter rolls, and you also have many, many ways of discouraging people from registering to vote or disappearing their registration once they do vote. And this is set up all over the country, and we've seen it from Florida to Alaska. You know, it is a known, and it's not just the Russians. I'm sure the Russians are involved, but it's, you know, operators who've been doing this for a long time, who are 100% American. And what we need to do, if we're going to have this election go and not have Trump for 4 more years, is that we need to make sure that everybody who thinks they're registered to vote is, in fact, registered to vote. And that means getting at the registration rolls, having people check their registration, and then making sure that they're rightfully registered. And this happened to me in Ohio in 2004. I had lived in the same house since the 80s, in other words, 20 years, and I got a notice saying I wasn't registered to vote. I had to call the election board 4 times, and finally I got registered. After I'd voted from the same house in the same precinct where I was teaching history at the college for 20 years. So people, if you're listening here and you think you're registered to vote, you better check. You know, call the election board, go online, and make sure that you are and that your neighbors are, in fact, registered to vote, because they may have stripped you off the voter rolls without letting you know.
And as you point out, I mean, we already know that the voter rolls are being stripped of millions of voters, but the issue of the electronic voting, and I covered this myself for many, many hours in the heydays of my daily coverage, that the electronic voting machine tallies, as you point out, can be easily flipped.
Oh, God, it's 10 keystrokes. I mean, there was a voting machine. I went to the University of Michigan, and there's a computer professor there, and he took a voting machine that had been used in the most recent election, and in less than 10 minutes, he programmed it to play the University of Michigan fight song. I mean, it's ridiculous. There's just no there. And
right.
After 2000, there was 2002, there was a federal law, the Help America Vote Act, and they put in a ton of money into voting machines, and those voting machines were just ridiculously easy to flip. And now they're buying a new generation. That's 18 years ago, and this new generation is just as vulnerable as the other one. I mean, it's ridiculous. We do have electronic voting machines that will work. It's very simple. They print out, and they're readily available, and they're cheaper than many of the machines that are being purchased for a lot of money. But there's one type that's cheap enough that can be done. And what it does is it prints out, you come to it, you're registered to vote, you show up at the polling station, you go to the machine, you type in your name and all that stuff, and it prints out a ballot. Now, this is important in places like Los Angeles, where we have 14 different languages that people vote in. So you can't really have a stock of paper ballots. So what you do is the person comes, the voter comes, they get a ballot in Tagalog or Spanish or Chinese or whatever, and then they mark the ballot by hand, either with a pen or a pencil. And then when they check it over, they insert it into the voting machine. The voting machine makes a digital image of the ballot, basically takes a digital picture, and then the ballot goes to the other side into a bin, a plastic bin, and you can see the ballot in the plastic bin. And that's it. It's simple. And then when they do the tally, they count electronically count the digital images, and that gives you the vote count. And then if you want to do a recount, you've got the paper ballots there. So that will work. Now, there are those who fear that they can mess with the digital image, but it's pretty tough to do. And again, you have the paper ballot to back it up.
Exactly.
But beyond that, we're getting all sorts of crazy voting machines, ridiculous, that can be manipulated. So we're going to have a gathering in L.A., and we're going to go and have teams to go to all the swing states and make sure that the people are properly registered and that the voting machines cannot be flipped. This is you can write me Solartopia at Gmail. Write me at solartopia@gmail.com if you want to be part of the team. And we're going to be in Florida, Georgia, Alabama, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, Iowa, Arizona, New Mexico, and Nevada. Those are the states that we consider are anticipating serious theft. And there's no mystery here anymore.
No,
we've seen this for 20 years.
Exactly.
Since 2020.
Exactly.
We know how to do it. We know what's been done, and we know what they're planning to do. And I'm sure the Russians are involved, but it's not just the Russians. It's the usual corporate Republicans, and the Democrats will do it in their own states. As a matter of fact, we had issues in Maryland on the Democratic side. So, especially in the primaries, by the way.
And where do they write you again if they want to participate in one of these states?
Email me. You can email me about nuclear power. You can email me about my book. And you can email me about working on the election.
And is it solartopia@gmail.com?
Solartopia, SOLARTOPIA @gmail.com.
Fantastic. Look, when we come back, though, I want to touch on a few more things about the voting issue, and I know we'll probably touch on it second hour as well. But Citizens United really changed it's a sea change of what happened to body politic, at least from the outside. And then I want to talk about the millennials and getting them out to vote. We'll be right back. Our guest is Harvey Wasserman. Stay up with his amazing work and his teams of work around the country. Go to www.solartopia.com.
Hello, I'm John Perkins, author of many books, including Confessions of an Economic Hitman, www.johnperkins.org, and you're listening to 21st Century Radio with Dr. Zohara Hieronimus, one of my very favorite people and a person who's spreading light around the world, who's really opening us up to the new changes in consciousness that we're experiencing at this incredible time in human history. My hat's off to Dr. Zohara Hieronimus and all that she's doing. She not only represents freedom of the press, but she also represents this new wave of waking up to new consciousness that's going to create a sustainable, just, peaceful world that's thriving for all sentient beings. Keep listening.
Thank you, John. And again, our guest this hour, Harvey Wasserman, is the same keynote charger on those themes, www.solartopia.com. So in your book, Harvey, your new book, The People's Spiral of U.S. History, you talked about the Democrats winning the demographic shift in the Golden State when Obama won the White House in 2008. And you write, the white new right was terrified and took immediate action. In 2010, its red map cross-check coup made Jim Crow the law of the land. Citizens United was the key. Talk to us about that.
So what happened was that it became clear to the Republicans, especially with a black man entering the White House, that the demographic shift in America, and this is the most important thing politically happening, and the 2020 election is all about demographics. So I mean, there are 85 million millennials in this country. 5 of them are my children, by the way, and all girls.
And several of them are mine.
There you go. So they realized that they could not ever have power again if they allowed the electoral system to proceed. And so what they did in 2010, completely without the Democrats having any consciousness of what they were doing, is the Koch brothers funded some key races. They figured out where they could go and win just a few races with just a few $1 million and take over the gerrymandering process. And because every 10 years, the states, reapportion their congressional and state legislative districts. And they were so successful that, like in Ohio, which is about 50-50 Democrat-Republican, they have 3/4 of the congressional delegation of the Congress congressional seats, and between 2/3 and 3/4 of both houses of the state legislature. It's outrageous. And this is for 10 years. And it's same in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, all over the country. The Democrats were completely asleep at the wheel, as usual. And this red map coup, it's called red map, they just took over the gerrymandering. And at the same time, it's not just Citizens United. In the 70s, there were 2 court decisions. There was a justice named Lewis Powell, who was right out of the Chamber of Commerce, a brilliant guy, and totally in favor of the Hamiltonian view that rich people should run the country. And he was behind 2 key decisions, the Buckley decision in 76 and the Bellotti decision in 78, that prevented campaign finance reform. And then with Citizens United, and then another decision right after that, so it's really 4 decisions that have cemented the money power in this country, of which Donald Trump is the ultimate expression. I mean, Donald Trump is basically a mobster, and he grew up in a home that was defined by organized crime, and that's not an exaggeration. His father was a slumlord who built tenements with concrete that could not have been poured without the cooperation of the 5 families that run New York. And, it's all in David K. Johnston's book. Now, my website, Solartopia.org, it's not .com, it's .org, is under construction right now. It'll be ready in a few days. But you can write me at solartopia@gmail, and I'll plug you into all of this. And so, Zoe, what's happening now is we have a history in this country of voter suppression that dates right to the beginning. Women couldn't vote. People without property could not vote. The property qualifications were generally gone by the Civil War. And then we had the 15th Amendment, and black people were supposed to be able to vote, but Jim Crow came into the South. And they passed these laws saying if you've ever been convicted of a felony, you can't vote. And then they proceeded to felonize, all the black men in the South. But women finally got the right to vote. Young people got the right to vote. Native Americans got the right to vote in 1924. Isn't that reassuring? And then in the 60s, the Civil Rights Movement came and started delivering the vote to black people. So what was the response? Nixon's response to the Civil Rights Movement was the drug war. And there's a great book about this called The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, who's a law professor at Ohio State. And they used the drug laws to, again, put all the black men and some women, but mostly men, in the prisons, black and Hispanic. 41 million arrests between the early 70s and the 2010s. And that's how they've held power. Now, the drug war is winding down. So what they have to do now, using the money in politics, but the money in politics is actually less important than the stripping the voter rolls and the flipping of the electronic machine. Mm-hmm. We have found that we can win elections when we're outspent, but you can't win them when they prevent people from voting and then flip the voting machine.
Well, and you've also stated that California's Super Tuesday coming up on March 3rd, 2020, it will hugely impact, you write, the nation and world, including the global climate crisis, the Green New Deal, and the outcome of the 2020 election. Why?
Well, because Bernie is here. And, in fact, he's got a big rally going on downtown as we speak. And it's impossible to overstate the impact of Bernie Sanders. You have to, whether he wins or not, what he has done is he has educated and excited an entire generation of young people. You know, he's the radical, grumpy. I've met him, by the way. He really is grumpy, Bernie. You know, and he is a grumpy old professor, but he has been absolutely consistent. He's obviously brilliant. He has a certain charisma, and he has changed the minds, or at least awakened the minds of a whole new generation. And you heard it here first. In 8 years, AOC is going to be a serious candidate for president. Mm-hmm. And there will be, if we still have a country, or if we still have a human race in 8 years, if there's still a planet. I mean, but she represents a ethnically, gender-wise, and in terms of her youth and her politics, the impact that Bernie Sanders has had on the millennials. And as I say, there are more millennials than there are baby boomers. And they're getting more every day. 85 million millennials, over 76 million baby boomers. And they control the upcoming election. In my book, The Spiral of U.S. History, I have a map that shows if only people under 30 had voted in the 2016 election. In other words, if you count only the votes of the people under 30, the Democrats won in a landslide, over 400 electoral votes. You know, the whole country is blue except for this gash in the middle, so from the Dakotas down, and even Texas. In Texas, in 2016, the people under 30 voted overwhelmingly for the Democrats. So this is what's happening. The question is, are we going to survive 2020? And the Republicans know, and the right wing knows, and the corporations know, that this is their last chance. Because after this election, the millennials are already going to be in their mid-30s, and there's going to be too many of them. They will never win. They will lose Texas. They will lose Florida. They may even lose Georgia. I won't go as far as Alabama, but, there's a whole lot of traditional Republican states that Nixon flipped to the Republican Party with the drug war starting in the 70s that is going to go back to the Democrats. But the key is, who are the Democrats going to be? Are they going to be Hillary Clinton, or are they going to be Bernie Sanders? And she blew it in 2016. All she had to do was be civil to Bernie. I mean, Bernie campaigned more for Hillary Clinton than Hillary Clinton did in many states. And all she had to do was not call us all deplorables and sign up the millennials. She would have won in a landslide. But she turned people away, and that's the corporate Democrats. Again, if they nominate Biden, we're going to lose.
Mm-hmm, that's
Trump
for sure.
Destroy Biden.
I agree.
But he's not going to beat Bernie. And there's another name that's come up, Zoe, and you're going to be one of the very first to have it on your show. And that's Sherrod Brown. So Sherrod Brown is the senator from Ohio. I've known him for many, many years. He's a very good guy, and he is a genuine progressive. He's never been a Republican. He's always been deeply immersed in the labor movement. And if we have a brokered convention, which I think is highly likely, since Biden won in South Carolina, which surprised me, but if there's a brokered convention, there's only one person that the corporate Democrats can nominate that will bring out the millennials, and that's Sherrod Brown. He's not tremendously charismatic. He's short. He's got a gravelly voice, but he's incorruptible, and he's the one I think that could unite, the only one that could unite the corporate Democrats with the millennials, and that may be where you got to keep your fingers crossed. We'll do more than that. I mean, if it gets to a brokered convention, which is really going to anger a lot of people, but we can't afford that kind of anger. So, we'll have to watch it. Well,
and I also like the fact that you called attention to Stacey Abrams, who became the first major Democrat to really defy a stolen election. I mean, and did so boldly.
Well, she's terrific. She could be a vice president.
Yeah.
It's weird. The person they're talking about, the people are now looking beyond step one. If Bernie wins the nomination, okay, that's great. And I have people who will not talk about anything else. All Bernie, okay? But realistically, if we do get to the convention and they steal it, which they did in 2016, I mean, I think that Bernie was the rightful nominee in 2016, which is why California is so critical. I think they stole a lot of votes from him in California and in New York. The people who dispute that, it's all fine. All she had to do was reach out, which she didn't do. So in 2016, and Bernie, you knows very well how bad Trump is. And, he did not hesitate to campaign against him in 2016, and he won't hesitate to campaign against him in 2020 if he's not the nominee. He's made that very clear. So it all depends. Tuesday is Super Tuesday. We'll know a lot more afterwards. Either he's going to get the nomination or there's going to be a brokered convention.
Fascinating.
And if there's a brokered convention, we cannot sustain Joe Biden. I mean, I won't go into it. He's going to lose. Trump will beat Joe Biden, but he won't beat Sherrod Brown. And that's what we got to look to. And the person that he should run with Stacey Abrams. Bernie should run with Stacey Abrams. Sherrod Brown should run with Stacey Abrams. But the person there was an article about this in the New York Times, and you know who they're mentioning that he should run with?
We got to go. We'll
Michelle
come back.
Obama.
Oh, that's interesting. Michelle Obama. Harvey Wasserman's with us. We'll be back. Go to solartopia.org.